Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning, dear devotees, as today we have the wonderful opportunity to hear together the glorious Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam in the association of our Nitya Siddha, pure devotee, His Divine Grace Abhay Charanada Vinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, and of course the most glorious divine Sri Sri Radha Gopinath, Sri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra, Gauranitai, and hosts of others who are here for this Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam. So today we're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 16, Text 15. And it's continuing on the chapter of the doorkeepers cursed by the sages. So here. Te yoga maya ya rabda Parameshya mahodayam Prochahu pranjalo vipraha Prahrishtakshubhita tvachaha Te yoga maya ya rabda Parameshya mahodayam Prochahu pranjalayo vipraha Prahrishtakshubhita tvachaha Te yoga maya ya rabda Bhadameshya mahodayam Prochahu pranjalayo vipraha Prarishtahakshubhita tvachaha. Vaishnavas. Te yoga maya yarabda Parameshya mahodayam Procho pranjalayo vipraha Prarishta shubhita tvachaha Te yoga maya yarabda Parameshya mahodayam Prochahu pranjalayo vipraha Prahrishtakshubhita tvachaha Te yoga maya yarabda Parameshya mahodayam Procho pranjalayo vipraha Prahrishtakshubhita tvachaha. Vaishnavis. Te yoga maya yarabda Parameshya mahodayam Procho pranjalayo vipraha Prahrishtakshubhita tvachaha Te yoga maya yarabda Parameshya mahodayam Procho pranjalayo vipraha Prahrishtakshubhita tvachaha Te yoga maya yarabda Parameshya mahodayam Rojo Pranjalayo Vipraha Prarishtak Shubhita Tvachaha. Word by word. Te, those, Yogamayaya, through his internal potency, Arabdha, had been revealed, Parameshtya, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Maha Udayam, multi-glories, Prochuhu, spoke, Pranjalayaha, with folded hands, Vipraha, the four brahmanas, Prahishtaha, extremely delighted, Shubhita Tvachaha, hair standing on end. Translation and divine purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The four Brahmana sages were nevertheless extremely delighted to behold him, and they experienced a thrill throughout their bodies. They then spoke as follows to the Lord, who had revealed the multi-glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through his internal potency, Yogamaya. Purport. The sages were almost too puzzled to speak before the Supreme Personality of Godhead for the first time, and the hairs of their bodies stood erect due to their extreme joy. The highest opulence in the material world is called Parameshtya, the opulence of Brahma. But that material opulence of Brahma, who lives on the topmost planet within this material world, cannot compare to the opulence of the Supreme Lord, because the transcendental opulence in the spiritual world is caused by Yogamaya, whereas the opulence in the material world is caused by Mahamaya. Om Agyantimirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshdaya Bhutale Shri Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamene Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Prachadine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Bhashyatya Deshatadine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Good morning, dear devotees, as we very humbly attempt to glorify this Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam in the association of the devotees. So essentially, in coming to research to this wonderful purport today, we came to the understanding that yesterday was indeed the appearance day of Vrindavan Das Thakur. Vrindavan Das Thakur ki jai. So we'll have a brief discussion on Vrindavan Das Thakur, both his life and his beautiful appearance day in Mamgachi, which is Godruma Dweep. So we'll describe that. We'll also look at this word Parameshya, the opulence of Brahma. We'll also, Prabhupada's talking about Yoga Maya and Mahamaya. What is the difference? Which historical personalities were under Mahamaya at which point in time? And interestingly enough, it's also Toshan Krishna Prabhu from our Yatra, his birthday today. So Toshan Krishna Prabhu ki jai. And also Chaturatma Prabhu had his appearance day yesterday on the same day as Vrindavan Das Thakur. So being devotees, we have the great ability to always celebrate birthdays. We know in Vrindavan recently there was Shivaram Maharaj had his appearance day, and all the devotees gathered in Radharaman Bagicha and for a wonderful glorification of Shivaram Maharaj. So we cast our minds back to 2007. 2007 is a very historically important year for Vrindavan Das Thakur, because that's when the Sadbhuja form of Krishna, or Krishna with his 6 arms. So Krishna, of course, plays with his flute, and he's sham-coloured, but Krishna is also green in his Ram form, and he carries the bow and arrow. And of course, Krishna is also Chaitanya, carrying the kamandalu and the water pot. So this is the Sadbhuja, or 6-armed form of Krishna. Indeed, that is the deity that is worshipped by Vrindavan Das Thakur. So if we go to Mamgachi in Godruma Dweep to this day, we can have beautiful darshan of the Sadbhuj form of Gauranga Mahaprabhu and Krishna, and we can also see Vrindavan Das Thakur's samadhi there. So you might ask the question, why is Vrindavan Das Thakur important to the Gaudiya Vaishnavas? Indeed, Vrindavan Das Thakur is the last disciple of Lord Nityananda. So Lord Nityananda gave Harinam Diksha to a number of disciples, and Vrindavan Das Thakur was the last disciple of Nityananda. And devotees very beautifully and very lovingly and very adoringly worship Nityananda through Vrindavan Das Thakur's Nityananda Dashtakam. Very beautiful prayer, which glorifies also Janava, who is the wife of Lord Nityananda, and also Vasudha. So Balaram has 2 wives in Goloka Vrindavan, and for the purpose of entering into Gaur Leela, we also have Janava and Vasudha in being the wives of Lord Nityananda. Because as we know, Lord Nityananda was an avadut. He'd already taken to the renounced order of life, and then Lord Chaitanya realized there's already, as Ishvara Prabhu explained in yesterday's Bhagavatam class, for the Rath Yatra festival in Jagannath Puri, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had already come to the understanding that all the Jagannath Puri devotees were very happy with the association of Lord Chaitanya. So Lord Chaitanya gave the instruction to Lord Nityananda to go out and preach. Lord Chaitanya also gave the instruction to Lord Nityananda, you will marry and therefore be the emblem for all of the grihastha or the household devotees. So Lord Nityananda did indeed marry Janava and Vasudha. So essentially 2007, as we said, is a very historically important year for the devotees, because one disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta established that Samadhi Mandir of Vrindavan Das Thakur in Mamgachi. So there was only one Mahant left. So as we know, Mamgachi is a very difficult place to get to, because in that section of the 9 islands of Mayapur, Jayapataka Maharaj explained, the river there is very curvy. So if you want to walk 200 meters, often you have to walk like 6 kilometers. The curves of Ganga Maya Ganga Mai in the region of Mamgachi is very curvy. So Jayapataka Maharaj explained that one day the head mahant of this temple in Mamgachi came to him and he said, I need to reveal my mind loving to you. I'm the last known disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta in this region of Mamgachi, and the deity of the Sadbuja form of Krishna appeared in my dream. And the deity form said to me, now I can see in ISKCON, the deities are very opulently worshipped there with beautiful prasadam, and they celebrate all the festivals very nicely. So I want you to donate this temple to ISKCON. So as we know, 2022 to this day, now ISKCON has proprietorship of the Vrindavan Das Thakur temple in Mamgachi. So it's a very celebrated place. When devotees go on Navadvip Parikram, they can pay humble obeisance to Vrindavan Das Thakur and therefore get extremely blessed, and so much mercy will flow upon them. So if we go to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he glorifies Vrindavan Das Thakur in the Chaitanya Charitamrita by saying anyone who understands the words of Vrindavan Das Thakur will perfect their lives, all their sins will immediately go away, and they will attain pure love for Radha and Krishna and Vrindavan. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, as we know, he's an incarnation of Murari Gupta for the purpose of entering and writing down the Leelas of Lord Chaitanya. But as Jayapataka Maharaj explained, the Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's Chaitanya Charitamrita is rich in the Antya Leela. So the later pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami wrote a lot about. However, Vrindavan Das Thakur writes a lot in his Adikand, or the younger pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. So we hear the beautiful stories how the thieves came and tried to steal little Nimai. They took him away, and there was the Yoga Maya potency of Nimai, whereby these thieves thought they've travelled all the way with Nimai back to their own hermitage, but then they turned around and they were still outside the front of Jagannath Babaji's house. Such is the Yoga Maya potency of Nimai. So in that 2007 Navadvip Parikram, we had Radhanath Swami sitting next to Jayapataka Maharaj, and on his far left was His Holiness Indrajumna Swami, thereby celebrating the wonderful occasion of Vrindavan Das Thakur's appearance. And we can really understand the dedication, the love, the adoration that these devotees, these great devotees, have for Vrindavan Das Thakur by sitting there on the day that it was passed over into the hands of ISKCON, on the very day that Vrindavan Das Thakur appeared. So essentially today we hear about this explanation of Parameshtaya, or Lord Brahma, Parameshya, the opulence of Brahma. So we know that Lord Brahma is very opulent, having created the world. We know he sat on the shore of the causeless ocean. He was praying to Vishnu, please give me help. And the words that came back were ta and pa, 2 syllables, tapa, so austerity. So as a result of Brahma's austerity, he got tremendous opulence. But as we know, the bewildering or puzzling feature, as Srila Prabhupada explains in this verse, of the opulence in the material world caused Brahma to become a little bit bewildered. So as we know from Krishna book, there's that beautiful chapter, the bewilderment of Lord Brahma. So Brahma thinks himself to be supreme, he has these great qualities, and he decides to go and kidnap all the cowherd boys and then hide them in one of his clouds. So as we know, later on, the tears of Lord Brahma washed the lotus feet of Krishna, and he's begging for forgiveness because out of a lack of understanding, he didn't realize the opulence of Krishna, and therefore he engaged in these kidnapping pastimes. So essentially, if we look at this Parameshya, we can understand a beautiful pastime of Gorakishora Das Babaji, because it's explained that he was a wonderful traveller. He liked to walk around, he liked to visit the holy pilgrimage sites, And as a result of that, often he would transgress into or trespass into other people's property without knowing. Because his mood was, this is all Vrindavan, this is Krishna's land. As we know from Bhagavad Gita, Nirmamo Nirahankara. So those people who have no sense of proprietorship and no false ego, what is their reward? Yomad Bhakta Same Priyaha. So we become very dear to Krishna if we have no sense of proprietorship and no false ego. So Gorakishora Das Babaji not only thought that I have no sense of proprietorship, he thought everyone else has no sense of proprietorship and Krishna owns everything. Which to a wealthy landowner in Vrindavan who's just erected a fence probably thinks, well, this is my land, why are you transgressing on my land? And so Gorakishora Das Babaji retorted, you fool, even all the treasuries of the entire material creation cannot buy one particle of dust in Vrindavan. So that was the mood of Gorakishora Das Babaji, the wealth of Vrindavan. And this is explained, the Parameshwar of Lord Brahma is so much less than that it cannot compare to the opulence of the Supreme Lord. So if we also look at further verses from the Bhagavad Gita, it also explains in Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, text 41, Yad yad vibhuti mat sattvam srimad urjitam evava tat tad evava gachatvam mamo tejom shasambhavam. Know that all opulent, beautiful and glorious creations spring from but a spark of my splendor. So this is Krishna discussing with Arjuna. And we can understand that everything in the material world is only emanating from just a spark of Krishna's splendor. So there's so much more for us to encourage us to be inspired by, to develop that drita vrat, or that determination to go back home, back to Godhead, and be picked up from this miserable life of material suffering. Please pick me up from this material suffering so that I can be placed as one of the dust particles on your lotus feet. That's a beautiful prayer from Lord Chaitanya in his Shikshashtakam. So essentially, we can understand that Krishna owns everything. Indeed, he's the owner of us. He owns our body. So we should make sure that we respect our own body. We should make sure that we respect the bodies of others, and therefore we can respect the senior devotees as well. So essentially, going into a further understanding of this purport, it explains there's this in the spiritual world, it's Yogamaya, whereas in the material world, it's Mahamaya. So there is very much a difference. As we know from the chapter 2 or 3 of the Krishna book, it explains the birth or the advent of Lord Krishna, and it explains that at the same time that Krishna was being born, Yogamaya was being born in the womb of Mother Yashoda, because it's explained that Devaki was the biological mother of Krishna, and as a result of Kamsa's desire to kill Krishna, she had this idea that she wanted Krishna to be saved, and then Vasudeva in that beautiful pastime across the Jamuna river carrying Krishna on top of his head, and then goes to Vrindavan. And therefore transfers the children. Yogamaya comes back to Mathura, Janmabhumi, and Krishna goes to Mother Yashoda. So these pastimes, we should feel incredibly grateful that we have the opportunity to hear them. They purify our hearts, and they help us to remember Krishna, his wonderful qualities, his unbelievable or extraordinary pastimes, and we could feel incredibly grateful. It's explained that Vrindavan Das Thakur understood the topics of Krishna described by Srila Vyasadeva in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and in the same way he wrote Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat describing the pastimes of Gaura, who he accepted as non-different from Krishna. So it's essential when we go to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami and we pay obeisances to his Bhajan Kutir, which is in Radhakund, and also his Samadhi is in Radhakund. And we can ask him, what is the difference between Radha and Krishna and Chaitanya? And Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's response would be, as it appears in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Radha Krishna Nahi Anya. So there's no difference between Radha Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami would also glorify Vrindavan Das Thakur by saying, indeed, it's Veda Vyas appearing in the pastimes of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. So perhaps we could all understand that we want to hear more about Nityanandashtaka. So there's a beautiful verse of Vrindavan Das Thakur. I worship Lord Nityananda, the limitless root of the tree of devotional service. He is the abode of the mellows of devotional service, and no one can be compared to him. He is the be-all and end-all for his devotees, and the husband of Vasudha and Janava, to whom he is more dear than life itself, because he is always maddened with pure love for Krishna. The foolish non-devotees cannot understand that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. So there's very beautiful pastimes and discussions in the Chaitanya Bhagavat saying that very foolish people will say, okay, I love Krishna, but I don't understand Balaram, or I love Gauranga, but I don't understand Lord Nityananda. So that would be these foolish people not understanding that Krishna and Balaram are both on the platform of Vishnu Tattva. And Gaura and Nityananda are both on the platform of Vishnu Tattva, as is explained here, that Lord Nityananda is the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. So in worshipping the disciples and grand disciples and the followers of Lord Nityananda, we came across this beautiful personality by the name of Hati Bai. So Hati Bai was a very amazing princess, and she had so many suitors, not as many as Sita, trying to extract the sword or break Lord Shiva's bow, but Hati Bai had so many suitors, she had so much opulence. Her king was very grand, Maharaj, a great king, and so Hati Bai heard about the glories of Vrindavan. She was living in Kashmir, and she decided that, yes, I want to run to Vrindavan. I've read the Padyavali of Rupa Goswami. In there's a beautiful statement, my friend, run to Vrindavan. Hati Bai immediately, upon hearing the words of Rupa Goswami in his Padyavali, and also of Vrindavan Das Thakur, Mamashtu Vrindavana Eva Vasaha. As we know, Vasa means place. And Vrindavan Das Thakur is saying, please make Vrindavan my place of residence, life after life. Indeed, Raghunath Das Goswami is singing, Nija Nikata Nivasam Dehi Govardhana Twam. So please let me live near Govardhan Hill. All the Vaishnava acharyas, including Jiva Goswami, say if you can't, Jiva Goswami particularly says, if you can't live in Vrindavan, then live in Vrindavan in your mind. So Hati Bai had some inspiration from these Gaudiya Vaishnava leaders, taken worship of Gauranga and Nityananda, and she left her opulent house in Kashmir and walked from Kashmir to Vrindavan to take up residence there. And so it's very beautiful because when she went there, she ran away from all her kingdom. And as we know, kings, they have soldiers and retinues and people to chase after, particularly a loving member or a loved member of the family. So Hati Bai stayed in Vrindavan, and she had the realization that her father would send soldiers to get her and bring her back to Kashmir. So as a result of that, when she left the kingdom, she only carried a knife to help her with cutting berries from the side, but perhaps as a little bit of protection as well. And so Hati Bai went to Vrindavan, and there was a camel who had just left his body in Vrindavan. As we know, Vrindavan, there's four things that guarantee liberation: birth in Vrindavan, cremation in Vrindavan, initiation in Vrindavan, and death in Vrindavan. So this camel was guaranteed liberation, and so Hati Bai decided to open this camel with the knife that she had, and then she put herself inside the body of the camel. Such was her desire not to be caught by the soldiers of her family to take her back to Kashmir. Afterwards, devotees asked her, how did you tolerate the stench inside a rotting camel's body? And she said that stench of the rotting camel was much much better than the rotting stench of material life. So this is Hati Bai. If we go to Lal Babu Temple in Vrindavan, which is a very beautiful temple established by a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, there's a little kund just near there, the Hati Bai Kund, where in loving adoration to Hati Bai's determination to stay in Vrindavan and not leave, we can hopefully get like that. As Srila Prabhupada explained, we may think of ourselves as a tiny little sparrow, because there's that beautiful story about the sparrow who she just recently had some little baby eggs, and then the great causal ocean came and washed her eggs away. And then so Prabhupada's explanation is this sparrow then said to the great ocean, if you don't give me my eggs back, I'm going to empty out your whole water. Such was the determination. And then so the great causal ocean laughed at her, but she started her endeavor. As His Holiness Indradyumna Swami quotes Confucius, the journey of 1,000 steps begins with just one. So this little sparrow started picking up the water from the causal ocean, and in order to try and drain the entire causal ocean. And so it's very beautiful. Then Garuda appeared and then threatened the causal ocean, at which point the causal ocean gave all the eggs of the bird back. So we can be inspired by these wonderful stories of the great devotees who have given up their lives for the worship of Lord Chaitanya, for the adoration of Sri Krishna. And like Hati Bai, we can have that firm determination. Perhaps if our realization isn't at the level to go to Vrindavan, we can beg Krishna, we can beg Radha Gopinath. May we always live in Vrindavan in our minds. May we always think of Krishna. And what do we get as a result of thinking about Krishna? So there's a very beautiful verse which is explained, Ananyas chintayanto mam ye jana parupasate tesham nitya biyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. So this is a very beautiful explanation. We may think to ourselves, if I become a devotee, if I chant all the time, who will care for me? How will I have enough food? How will I have enough water? Krishna is saying here, with exclusive devotion, Krishna will personally carry what we lack and preserve what we have. So we hear this, going back to Vrindavan Das Thakur's beautiful description of Srivas Pandit, because a lot of the devotees have this great love and adoration for Srivas Anga. To this day, if we go to Mayapur, we can take darshan of Srivas Anga, or the place of Srivas Pandit, and there's very ecstatic kirtans going on there, there's very ecstatic Krishna Katar, and the devotees go there and they really immerse themselves in the mood of Srivas Pandit, that continual chanting of the holy names of the Lord. So if we go to Chaitanya Bhagavat of Vrindavan Das Thakur, chapter 4, it's very beautifully explained that there is a meeting between Srivas Pandit and Lord Chaitanya. So Lord Chaitanya approaches Srivas Pandit, and of course Srivas Pandit is in so much ecstasy, as it's explained in this verse. His hairs were standing up on his end, tears were flowing from his eyes like torrents of rain just by the mere darshan of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Lord Chaitanya went there, and Lord Chaitanya had this thought, Srivas, your house is so opulent. You're feeding so much family, because Srivas had so many branches, children, grandchildren, and then Lord Chaitanya had this thought, Srivas, how are you maintaining everyone? And Srivas said, I'm not working a job, I don't have any money, I merely chant the holy names of the Lord, I hear Krishna Katar, I try and respect the Brahmanas, the Vaishnavas to the best of my ability. But I know for a fact that whatever is mine, by the will of providence, I will accept, and as a result of that, I'm completely well taken care of, just merely by the will of providence. So Srivas then, Lord Chaitanya then asked Srivas another question, what happens if food doesn't come? So Srivas clapped his hands 3 times. And Srivas said, if I don't eat for 3 days in a row, I will take a rope around my neck with a stone in it, throw myself in the Ganga, and that will be the end of my life. So this is the words from Srivas to Lord Chaitanya. At which point, Lord Chaitanya roared at him. Lord Chaitanya roared. And he said, how do you think I will not take care of you? I will preserve what you have and I will carry what you lack. Even if Lakshmi herself has to go out begging, you will be taken care of. This is the mood of Lord Chaitanya. Lakshmi Devi herself has to go out begging for Srivas. So that was the mood of Lord Chaitanya. So roaring in that. So we have to pay obeisances to Vrindavan Das Thakur. We have to take the dust off his lotus feet on our head. We have to beg for Vrindavan Das Thakur that we can get some inspiration to read Chaitanya Bhagavat. One the beautiful devotee in Vrindavan dedicated himself. His mission was to try to read Chaitanya Bhagavat 100 times. And so he left his body still with that desire in his mind to read Chaitanya Bhagavat. Such was the divine mercy of Vrindavan Das Thakur. So as we go further into our understandings, we can say that Krishna knows everything. Krishna knows the past, Krishna knows the present, Krishna knows the future. As we explained last week, there's a very beautiful temple of Lord Nrsingadev just at the back of Radha Vallabha, and it has Lord Nrsingadev with 3 eyes, or Tri-Kala Gyan. So Krishna knows past, present and future, 3 phases of time. And then we in our studies, we came across the beautiful words of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7:26. Vedaham samatitani vartamani charjuna bhavishyani chabhutani mam tu veda nakashana. O Arjuna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I know everything that has happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and all things that are yet to come. I also know all living entities, but me no one knows. So how magnificent, how magnanimous, how beautiful is Krishna. He understands, he knows every single thing for every single living entity. Why, when we go to Vrindavan, does a mosquito come in the door? Because Krishna knows what the mosquito did in the past. Krishna knows what we did in the past. Why, when we go to Vrindavan, do we get harsh speech from brahmanas? Because Krishna knows our mood. He knows what's in our heart. He also knows what's in the heart of the brahmanas. As it is explained in this verse, the 4 Kumaras approaching Vijay, Jai and Vijay, they cursed them. But from our perspective, if someone speaks harshly to us, as Kamsari Sena beautifully explained many years ago, that we have to tolerate that. We have to just tolerate. There's no response back. There's not, oh, I'm going to retaliate to a senior because he did this to me. It's just, it have to end. We have to think of Lord Chaitanya. Things will become very easy if we just think of Lord Chaitanya. That's what Vrindavan Das Thakur teaches us. Things become very easy if we think of Lord Chaitanya. If people are being harsh at us or speaking very difficult speech, we just think of Lord Chaitanya, especially the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya, and then we can become purified. So also the disciples of Srila Prabhupada had an explanation of this word parameshya, because as we know, Srila Prabhupada translated all of the Bhagavatam up to chapter 14. So if we go to chapter 70 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's explained parameshya kamo nriptas tad bhavan anumodatam. So here the disciples, which is of course Hridayananda Goswami Maharaj and others, parameshya is uncontested dominion. So this parameshya Srila Prabhupada is speaking about here, the unrivaled opulence of Brahma in the material world is uncontested dominion. So also other historical personalities also had this uncontested dominion. So King Yudhisthira, he also had this parameshya feature. He had uncontested, no one contested King Yudhisthira. He had so much opulence. But then, of course, perhaps it's pertinent to remember with Jai and Vijay's pastimes, as they were cursed, then they were incarnated in the material world in the form of demons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, also Shalva and Dantavakra, and Ram and Ravana. That's the incarnations of Jai and Vijay. So essentially, the reason why we made that point was because then it's explained that Hiranyakashipu was such a powerful demon. He also had this parameshya, or uncontested dominion, to the point that Agni, the fire god, was cutting up the vegetables in the kitchen of Hiranyakashipu. You know, Lord Brahma was acting as a servant for Hiranyakashipu. This was, you know, completely against the psychology of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, because we worship Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. However, Hiranyakashipu took that position by believing himself to be the proprietor, believing himself to be the controller, and he did have that great ability through studying the Srimad Bhagavatam. So even the demons, they study the Srimad Bhagavatam, the devotees study the Srimad Bhagavatam, because we understand the glories of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So there's further beautiful explanations, because then someone was in a room conversation with Srila Prabhupada, talking about this discussion of Mahamaya and Yogamaya, and then someone posed the question, well, is Arjuna in Mahamaya or Yogamaya? Because we might pose the question, you know, Krishna ridicules Arjuna at one point, calling him Gudakesha. Krishna also calls him O Bala, strong-armed. And then Krishna also says to Arjuna, in a commentary by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, if you run away to the forest and don't fight, your whole family will think of you as a eunuch. So Prabhupada, then one of the disciples said, is Arjuna in Mahamaya or Yogamaya? So then Prabhupada's response was, when Arjuna surrendered to Krishna, then he's in Yogamaya, but before surrender, he's in Mahamaya. So all those thoughts of Karpanya dosho pahatas vibhavam, or I don't know what to do, that's the feature of Mahamaya, to bewildering us. We don't know what to do. Should we take a step in this direction? Should we take a step in that direction? That's Mahamaya. Surrender to Krishna. We understand Krishna is the Chaitya Guru in the heart. Perhaps he would send one of his beloved servitors in the form of Guru to give us guidance and teach us which way we should go, how we should think, and so on. So that's a very beautiful explanation of the difference between Yogamaya and Mahamaya. So also, when we think about Yogamaya, we understand that she was born in the womb of Mother Yashoda. And then here Prabhupada, in another room conversation, he said, the original Yogamaya is Krishna's internal potency. So who is the internal potency of Krishna? Srimati Radharani. That is Radharani. And Mahamaya is external potency, Durga. So if we want to become more materially absorbed, if we want to become YouTube-aholics, if we want to become Facebook acharyas, then we worship Durga. If we want to become, you know, very sincere with our bhakti practice, if we want to become very sincere with our bhajan, with our chanting, with our book distribution, then we worship Srimati Radharani, Krishna's internal potency. Further, it's explained by Prabhupada, Shrishti Shtiti Pralaya Sadhana Shakti Eka Chaye Vayasya Bhuvanani Bibharti Durga. So Durga is the superintending goddess of this whole material world. Everything is going on under her control. So Durga is explained by Prabhupada as explaining the controlling the whole material world. At times, Prabhupada in his rooms in Radha Damodar would pray to Yogamaya, Srimati Radharani, please protect me from Maya. Of course, Prabhupada is talking about this controlling factor of the material energy. For those devotees who want a further understanding of this Mahamaya, when devotees become bewildered by it, His Holiness Indradyumna Swami gave a very beautiful class about the Kambi hill. Because as we know, Krishna is the first progenitor. Every single one of us originally had birth in Goloka Vrindavan. Then a lot of the fallen conditioned souls, it's exactly explained, the pastime at Kambi Hill is that place where the devotees crossed over the line, and as a result of that, they were forced to take birth in the material nations. So essentially, there's so many beautiful things that Prabhupada said about Yogamaya and Mahamaya. Prabhupada said Yogamaya is love and Mahamaya is lust. So Very beautiful when we can come to that understanding. We pray to the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada, please help us to love more and please allow our lust to diminish. Indeed, Raghunath Das Goswami says in his beautiful poem, Manashiksha, while here on the path of devotion, I've been attacked by the hideous gang of lust, anger, greed, madness, illusion, and envy, who have bound me around the neck with the ropes of my own wicked deeds. I am being killed. Cry out piteously like this to the devotees of the destroyer of Bhaka. They can save you from these enemies. So indeed, in this path of bhakti, without us even knowing it, we have a lot of enemies. So we can think, hey, I'm innocent. I'm just taking prasadam from the temple. I just love halva. What's wrong with that? I want to go to kirtans. I want to hear about Indrajumna Swami traveling to Utah for the Sadhu Sangha retreat with Satyananda Maharaj, Bibi Govinda Swami, Chadarama Prabhu, Badahari Prabhu, Madhava, all these wonderful devotees of Kinchana Krishna. I want to hear about that. I want to hear about their kirtans. Why do I have enemies? Who is our greatest enemy? Our mind. Our mind is our greatest enemy. Prabhupada explained in the translation to Krishna's words, for the self-controlled sage, the mind is the best of friends. But for those who have not controlled their senses, the mind is the worst enemy. So out of anyone, we might think, oh, I went to school, there was bullies. We might think to ourselves, I used to play this sport against other people, they were enemies. But no, our own mind is our worst enemy, because the mind has the propensity to lead us away from Krishna, to start worshipping Mahamaya. Indeed, we can think to ourselves, well, how do the gopis, what do they do for Yogamaya? So we can say there's Lalita, Vishaka, Indulekha, Tungavidya, Sudevi, Rangadevi, Chitradevi, and Champakalata. Or what are the gopis praying to Yogamaya? So they're praying to Yogamaya, please give me Krishna as my husband. So this is it's a significant day. They prayed, that's the Vrashranam Leela. So even to this day, a lot of wonderful Vaishnavis, they pray to Krishna in the same way, and they worship Krishna through the Katyayani Vrat. So at the end of Kartik, every year we have a Katyayani Vrat, and even great devotees like Ayendra Prabhu, he very determinedly and very conscientiously and very confidently worship this Katyayani Vrat in the mood of the gopis to try and make Krishna, or beg the Yogamaya to give Krishna as my husband. That's following in the footsteps of the gopis of Vrindavan. And every morning we sing Seva Adhikara Diye Koro Nijadasi. So it's a prayer to become a maidservant. So they prayed to Yogamaya. At the time, Krishna was only 15 or 16 years old. And so that's the Vedic culture. The children would be married. In our terms, we think, younger children, they're 15. But this was the age that they would get married. 12 and 13-year-old girls would marry a 15 or 16-year-old boy. That's the Vedic system, or the Varnashram culture. So it's also beautiful because in this verse it also speaks about Yogamaya, and this is represented in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, text 27 as well. Naham prakasha savasya Yogamaya samavritaha mudo yam nabi janati loko mam ajam avyayam. So Krishna says, I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them I am covered by my eternal creative potency, Yogamaya, and so the deluded world knows me not, who am unborn and infallible. So Krishna is saying here that essentially he doesn't show himself to everyone. We might ask ourselves, there's 3 million people who live in New South Wales. There's 25 million people living in Australia. How many people has Krishna showed himself to? How many people have a Bhagavatam set? How many people have any one of Srila Prabhupada's books? At the time of the last book distribution newsletter, we read that 580 million books have been distributed all around the world. So of those people, there's 7 billion people in the world. Only a small fraction have actually received Srila Prabhupada's mercy through through his books. As is explained, that's his Brihat Madanga. So we have to be very thankful to Krishna that for this fraction of time we have an understanding that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We have the desire also that we want to continually be in the shelter of these devotees. We want the books of Srila Prabhupada's to always be in our hands, in our bhajan kutir, wherever we happen to be living. May we always take that step to read Srila Prabhupada's books, and may we always, when we approach the deities, please give us blessings so I can read more. Please never let me get to the point where I think I understand everything. Because as Srila Prabhupada explained, the greatest fool thinks he knows everything. Krishna doesn't know himself, his own potencies. That's the reason, the external reason for the manifestation of Lord Chaitanya is to understand the mood of Srimati Radharani. So there's so many further beautiful explanations. Also, going back to when Jayatvataka Maharaj was glorifying the Sadbhuja form of Vrindavan Das Thakur's deities. And he was saying there was a beautiful pastime because we know from Valmiki Narayan that Ram was banished and Sita went with him from Ayodhya into the Dandakaranya forest for that 14 years of exile. And then, of course, Sita was kidnapped by Ravana, and then all the beautiful devotees helped bring Sita back. But then Sita was banished for the second time by Lord Ram himself personally for reasons that are perhaps beyond our level of understanding to be able to appreciate. But Jayapataka Maharaj explained that the beauty of Lord Ram is he gave a golden deity form to Sita to worship. So Sita was perfectly okay even in the separation of her Ram because she had the ability to worship the Gauranga or the golden complexion form of Krishna in her banishment. So it's very beautiful and intricate details of the changes between Lord Chaitanya or exchanges between Lord Chaitanya and Lord Ram. There's a beautiful conversation in Valmiki Narayan where Lord Ram actually says to Sita, you know, in my next incarnation I will be golden complexioned in the form of a sannyasi with a danda and a kamandalu. And so Sita's response was she was in grief. She was grief-stricken as a result of hearing that Lord Chaitanya would indeed be sannyas, which means, as is explained in the introduction to the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada glorifies Lord Chaitanya's sannyas as the ideal sannyasi. He didn't take any association of women. He didn't have any external talks with women or laughing with women. He was just very sincere in his sannyas, and the female disciples knew to pay obeisances from a distance. So that's one mood of sannyas, but we always have to remember the talks between Ramananda Rai and Lord Chaitanya, because in that, rather than Lord Chaitanya chastising Ramananda Rai, as we know Ramananda Rai was a wonderful, he staged theatrical, dramatic pastimes of Radha and Krishna. He was involved in dressing the girls as such things. And when Lord Chaitanya meets Ramananda Rai, Lord Chaitanya's words to Ramananda Rai was, "You are the perfect sannyasi. You're unaffected by female association. You're like wood. You don't change in the association of anyone. Therefore, you're the perfect sannyasi." This is the words from Lord Chaitanya to Ramananda Rai. So, through researching this wonderful class, we feel very grateful that we had the opportunity to hear about the glories of Hati Bai, who emboweled a camel, lived inside a camel for 3 days, and therefore we can take inspiration ourselves. When we travel to Vrindavan, Radhanath Swami said, "Oh, you know, we now make, is MVT still available, or can I get this hotel?" But we have to remember that the great devotees often traveled there by foot. You know, the Goswamis of Vrindavan, to find Radhakund, they had to walk there. Which for us these days is quite a long distance to walk, so we take the motor car. As Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was the first sannyasi to drive in a motor car, And he explained that, yes, I use the motor car to get to my preaching events. I can get to my preaching events much quicker, so therefore I will take the service of the motor car rather than just using the feet. So when in here we explain that today's verse, it explains that the 4 sages were puzzled. So what is this puzzling feature? How can we understand this puzzling feature? Devotees, such great devotees like the Kumaras, who are explained as Mahajans, they're getting bewildered or puzzled as a result of the direct darshan of Krishna. So Prabhupada gave a very beautiful explanation of Dr. Frog, or the frog in the well. So the frog thinks to himself, this is the whole water creation here, just the water in that tiny little well. So in the same way, if the Dr. Frog is told about the entire Atlantic Ocean, he becomes very puzzled or bewildered because he's never experienced that. So for the same thing for us, we often get bewildered and puzzled in the association of Krishna. We hear that he knows everything. We hear he's situated in the heart of every living entity. So we can also get bewildered as a result of that because we haven't ever experienced knowing everything. We don't know what we did yesterday. We don't know what someone else did 5 minutes ago. But Krishna knows everything. Krishna even knows what the sun god did when in the Satya Yuga, what he said to the sun god. Krishna knows everything. Therefore, we should always pay obeisances to the lotus feet of Krishna, always try to meditate on his transcendental form to the best of our abilities, such that he will preserve what we have and carry what we lack. So in closing, I found a very beautiful bhajan, which is in Braj Bas. So essentially, the devotees there sing this bhajan in Seva Kunj. And just a brief description, it says, in front of the cowherd boys, while the cows are behind, between them my Madan Gopal is present. The cowherd boys play with little sticks with their little hands. My Madan Gopal Krishna is playing the flute. So it goes, Choti choti gvayan, choti chote gwal, choto somero Madana Gopal, age gvayan, piche gwal, Bicha men mero Madana Gopal, Kali gvayan gore gwal, Shama vadana mero Madana Gopal, Rasatan mena gvayan dud pite gwal, Makana kayo mero Madana Gopal, Choti lakuti choti hata, Bamshi bajo mero Madana Gopal, Choti sakian madhuvana baj, Rasa rachawe mero Madana Gopal. So Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bo. Yes, Rava Shankar Prabhu. Rava Shankar. Sure.
First one is Mahamaya in this material world represented by Bhadrakali, Durga, and Yogamaya is represented by Subhadra. Is that true?
Yes, that's exactly right. As we explained, Mahamaya is represented. Interestingly, I found it somewhere. I'll see if I can find it. Prabhupada gave a whole list of the personalities who are Mahamaya. Durga is one of them for sure. And yes, indeed, Yogamaya is represented by Subhadra. That's why Krishna his sister is explained as Yogamaya. Yeah.
I believe Chaitanya Charitamrita touches on the philosophical aspects